10 longer years who have grown up in these camps, grown up with women who are becoming a very disaffected cadre of youth, what's going to happen to them? The money will be withdrawn. They will have to make some arrangements. They will either have to go to private houses, they'll either have to go back to their homes, however the money to help them go back will be less, or some of them are very elderly, they'll just be put into what are euphemistically called social welfare homes. So the outcome may well be very bleak. I hate to sound so negative about this, but over the years, the people who are going to return have probably returned by now. The people that have yet to return are probably not going to be able to return, whether the international community wants them to or not. So there's a whole problem of what to do with these people who are stuck, basically, in a quite rudimentary and pretty poor conditions still in most of these collective centres in the camps. So I think that that's something that, if the question is, has the international community failed, I think there have been some successes. Some of the returns have been successful. There's been a big effort. However, to take your point about reckoning, there's been very little reckoning and reconciliation. A lot of the returns have been done in terms of numbers of property and property rights, as opposed to people's own experiences and things about reconciliation issues. So in terms of success in number of houses and the amount of people that returned, there has been some success. However, if we can say in any term of reconciliation it's been a success, I would suggest less of a success. But we can open the debate now. I think we've heard quite a lot and there's raised quite a lot of issues. So perhaps if you'd like to ask some questions.
Thank you very much, Maria. Yes. Well, thank you to all the panellists. You know, it's really over to you now. Some of you no doubt will want to make statements. Try not to let them go on too long, because we want the dialogue to continue. But at the end of it, you know, I want people to feel they've had their say, and the panellists may intervene at any stage. If the microphone gets left behind and people can't hear, shout. Now, who's going to start off? Now, this gentleman I met before, what's your name, sir?
Mr.
Hode?
Hode. Hode,
Hode.
Same as the...
Like as the tennis player, right. I know Mr. Hode because he works for an evangelical church which took in some Bosnian refugees, and picking up Maria's point, the interesting point to me was that they have not actually gone back. They've settled in this country. So stand up and talk to make your point.
Their children are doing very well in England. They've all got their own idea of what they want to do when they leave school. Two of them want to be presenters on television. One wants to be a lawyer. One's already started work with a French team, materials, dresses and whatnot. And they've all got their, you know, even the one who had the most problems, he was suffering with dyslexia. He's been to college, learned about computers, which he was full of, and he is doing well too.
Well, that's a very good story, but Emir, is this a problem now about people going back to Bosnia and recreating or creating a proper country, or are the refugees really very reluctant, those in Western Europe and those internally displaced, to go back?
I'm not really sure on the authority on return. I do know we desperately and acutely miss smart, educated and energetic people, which I every so often meet outside Bosnia. And I do not blame anyone, though, for not going back. I think Bosnia is going to have this serious problem in the very, very near future, which is going to be lack of human resources. A lot of people have left the country, a lot of people have been killed, and there is a very few people there who have the abilities and the education, as I said, to take over. We're now at the stage in Bosnia in which we're talking about the ownership of the political processes in Bosnia, but unfortunately there aren't many people in the country who are equipped to take over the local political and other processes so that Bosnia can eventually become a self-sustainable and functioning state.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I talked earlier about Omarska and Srebrenica as the bookends of the war, without wanting to usurp the authority of the chair. We don't only have a survivor of the Srebrenica massacre with us today, we're honoured to have a man called Kemal Pervanic, who survived the concentration camp at Omarska. I don't know whether, and who wrote a wonderful book called The Killing Days about his time in the camp. So, in a way, talk about bookends. Kemal, Emir, that's Kemal over there.
I would actually like to talk about the role of the international community, and because I'm not angry with the Serbs right now, because the last killing stopped 10 years ago. I'm actually very angry with the international community. Because not only for 3.5 years the international community did almost nothing, but it's been 10 years actually since the war ended, and we haven't seen much progress in Bosnia. At the end of the war, the international community rewarded genocides with 49% of the country. And for example, 3 years ago, I went back for the first time. And the community that existed before the war was not there anymore. And for example, I wanted to go back to Amsterdam because I had a feeling I had to go back. So I went to the mine to negotiate with the marketing director of the mine to go there. And he said, well, go to Kozarac, go to Hambarine, places where most returnees actually came back. He was trying to tell me that everything was fine. He was not prepared to talk about the past, and it seems to be the case with all the other Serbs, actually, with most of the Serbs, I have to say. Actually, when I negotiated with him to go back to Amsterdam, I felt like a prostitute, because I felt that in a way it was my right during peacetime to be able to go to the place of execution. I survived. I don't see myself as a victim. If I have to carry a label, I would rather be a survivor than a victim. And I'm very angry with the international community because over the last 10 years, the international community missed a great opportunity to make Bosnia a better place. Instead, we are stuck with the constitution, which was not actually written by Bosnians or ratified by the Bosnian parliament or by Bosnians in a referendum, and we are unable to move forward. And the constitution will just keep status quo, and which actually helps the perpetrators of the crimes. I'm not actually. I would like to be optimistic about the future, but the reality is quite different actually. On this journey back, I attended a funeral of the victims that come mainly from Mamaska and that were actually identified by Eva. And what struck me most was that the security was provided by the police force that carried insignia of the Bosnian Serb nationalist double-headed eagle, because of which those people died. And for me it was really surreal, and the same thing will happen in Srebrenica in a few days' time. That those actually who committed those crimes are providing security for their victims. Another thing that I recently learned, and which again implicates the international community in this bad current situation in Bosnia, is that, for example, the chief interrogator in Amsterdam, Leonard, has been appointed. I think, I don't know what the name of the institution is, everyone will know better, but it's something like head of public security services. And he's in charge, I heard, of the witness protection program. And he's been reappointed by Pati Ashton. And a few good things happened actually on the second trip to Bosnia. I met together with my partner a few young Serbs who do admit that those crimes of 1992 did take place in Kiev and all over Bosnia. But they argue with their parents, they were children, they argue with their parents who refused to admit that those crimes took place. But what worries me is that is the lack of knowledge by those young guys, because, for example, Alex, one of them, he said, well, all those crimes were committed by extreme peasants from the villages surrounding together. And then he was shocked when I said to him that my village was attacked. And there was no Bosnian army in my village. My village was attacked by the professional Serb army. And I said professional Serb army because those who attacked my village fought with JNA in Croatia in the previous year, and they were paid actually for their role in that war. And very often actually, when you try to engage in a debate about what happened in the region, trying to bridge the gap that exists between the two communities, because there are two separate communities right now in Prijedor, and the gap is too wide. There has been only one attempt actually to bridge the gap, but most of the time, instead of actually admitting that those crimes took place and enable us to move forward, local Serbs or Serbian nationalists would say, "Oh, what about that Serb somewhere else?" And for example, in Prijedor, there are still some, I think, 1,300, Eva will know probably better, 1,300 people that are still unaccounted for, that are missing. And I'm very passionate about reconciliation. I'm actually even thinking about returning to Bosnia with my partner maybe in 2 years' time, and I would love to engage in the process. But how can we engage in the process of reconciliation when those who committed those crimes are not even willing to admit that those crimes took place? And actually, they know where our loved ones are. I mean, where their remains are, and we cannot reconcile with our past before we bury our until we recover and bury our loved ones. Yeah, I could talk for another 3 days about that.
I think Emir, thank you. Emir wanted to.
Thank you, Kamal. You mentioned the word in Bosnia now, reconciliation, and I just sort of wanted to pick it up from there and to sort of expand on that. We've recently had a number of initiatives basically aiming at setting up truth and reconciliation commissions, which nobody at this point really knows what they're going to be, what they're going to look like, nobody really has a clear idea as to where they're going with it, but the key word is reconciliation here, and the point I'm trying to make, and something I keep repeating everywhere, is that there is the only precondition and the only thing that we actually need to get the process of reconciliation started is justice. And justice is something that we're not getting. Justice is something that we haven't got. Even 10 years later, you mentioned Goranovic, who was chief investigator in Omarska. He's now chief of human resources in Agency for Protection and Information of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which basically means that he's going to be teaching future investigators and interrogators in the Bosnian police. We've recently had a wave of arrests in eastern Bosnia. Some 11 people were apprehended for their part in one of the massacres in July 1995 in the Kravica warehouse, which is the first and the biggest and probably the most infamous next to Branjevo in the series of massacres from July 1995. The funny thing is that all of these people who were arrested were still active members of the Bosnian Serb police. And some of them were so high up that they actually had to be invited to the office of the minister and then be handcuffed and taken out and taken to the state court in Sarajevo. But anyway, I think that the insistence on justice and that insisting on justice is the only way to go. We've got a little bit of it at the ICTY, but that's only a tip of the iceberg. And here's where I would like to come back to something that Dr. Honig said. I fully agree with you. It only took perhaps not more than a few hundred people who actually pulled the trigger. But what I'm talking about here are the bus drivers, bulldozer operators. And we know now, thanks to the confession made by Miroslav Deronic, who was appointed the civilian commissioner for Srebrenica by Radovan Karadzic immediately in the aftermath of the fall of the enclave, that on the night of 13th July there was about 100 buses in Bratunac, and that because police and army, where army was in Žepa already on the way there, police was fighting the column, they had to rely on armed volunteers to keep to guard the buses, because the prisoners inside the buses were starting to rock the buses and so on. So basically, a crime like this requires not active participation of the entire community, but it does require a tacit approval, perhaps, and B, a decision not to actually talk about it once the operation was over.
you want to reply?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And
Yeah, I think you just have to keep it closer to your mouth.
I would agree with that. But what is important though is to make distinctions in degrees of complicity and guilt. But one of it is an unnerving feature about this operation and about the whole Bosnian war is the degree to which the Bosnian Serbs in particular succeeded in making a society or large numbers of people complicit, not to the extent that they actually pulled triggers, but that they were aware of terrible things happening and did nothing to stop it. That is indeed an issue.
I think Maria wanted to add on the reconciliation issue.
Right. I think I brought it up. So I think that there were two things I wanted to say really. One is that Kamal, you're absolutely right. There are a lot of issues about justice that have to be addressed first. However, I would say that, and as you also pointed out, there are many women who are still in these camps, who have been through the SETY and have no witness protection. They're coming back to villages, but of course they're not going to want to go home. However, they have also had 10 years of psychosocial programs in international communities, and there has been still very little to discuss any kind of reconciliation issues. And in children going to school, children are going back to schools in different entities, across entities. Parents are not willing to send their children to school in the Republic of Srpska. They prefer to send them back to the Federation. So I think that we have to start from the very bottom before we even go. I mean, of course I agree that there has to be some justice, but if even things like children going to school, this is very fundamental. It has to be redressed, I think, before this can be moved on.
Could you stand up so we can hear the question?
Sure. I wanted to ask the panel, it's very difficult not to think of the international community being, if I can use the word again, complicit in the crimes, because it was very clear from 1989 onwards that Milosevic and his very nationalistic speeches was using this rousing nationalism to actually stir up a lot of the divisions that were taking place. And particularly when the maps were coming across the US, the maps of these mass graves, there certainly was a lot of information being generated. The final thing I think was when the war took place because of issues in Kosovo, not so much in Bosnia, that it shows that inactivity, in effect, shows, I think, some kind of complicity, because there were, at least since 1989, signals coming out that this nationalism was being whipped up, particularly linked in with a lot of religious context, the defeat of the Serbs by the Turks. All of this was being used to position divisions. I wanted to find out from the panel their thoughts on this.
Well, let's ask Eva first. You've been there for so many years. One has to say that the Srebrenica massacre was followed fairly quickly by Dayton. So there was some bombing of the Serbs. There was some response eventually. What are your thoughts on, the support you have received in your work, for example, and the wider response of the outside world?
Well, it is rather difficult to answer such a question because the question is complex, the answer is far complex. And I live in Bosnia. I mean, I'm not like Emir. I was not born in Bosnia. I was not even in Bosnia before '96. I came there in '96 and I still am there. And in some way I am almost Bosnian myself. And I am very disappointed. I'm everlasting optimist, but I am not everlasting optimist as to reconciliation, as to support of international community. I mean, all these small things which make you totally disillusioned. I mean, like 2 years ago, by the pure coincidence, I had to go to Sarajevo or something, and I did not go from the grave with the whole team to Tuzla. And the whole convoy left, and my colleague and I were standing on a crossroad, waiting, something like half a kilometer from the huge mass grave which we've been digging already for 6-8 weeks. And around was a small shop, and there hanged a couple of very young people. They were not all old, they were quite young. And of course they were Serbs, because it was Srebrenica Srpska. And we were standing there with all the luggage, waiting for a driver. And one of these guys, not quite drunk, but he was definitely had a couple of beers already. He looked at us and he shouted, "I am Chetnik," of course in Serbian. So we just looked at him and who cares. But he decided that he is going to tell us that he is really a Chetnik, so that we will understand what he is. So he said in very bad German, "Ich Chetnik." So we look at him and we tried to ignore, because the situation was not very pleasant, nobody there, only these drunk Serbs. And our driver, we didn't know when he will come. And I was with brand new computer. And so he got really annoyed that we don't bother to answer or don't bother to recognize his Chetnik's status. And he said once more again in German that he's, "Ich Chetnik." And then he said again in Serbian, "Do you know who is Chetnik?" So then I had enough. I looked at him and shouted, "The Chetnik is a character." And then we simply were waiting very humbly for a driver, because every moment they could come and beat us up. But it means simply, and actually the driver came in a couple of seconds almost. So we were there, but it is the truth. A Chetnik is a character. It is not a nationality. It is just a character of being a bad person. And it is what I said about these posters in Bosnia, in Serbia. That bici repriza, that it will happen once per day. And it is that when I'm in a mass grave 2 years ago, and it was a report of Commission for Cooperation with Serbian Commission cooperation with the Hague Tribunal. And this commission is writing that there is 1,800 Bosniaks Muslims who were killed who died in Srebrenica. And I am standing up to here in a grave, which was one of the biggest mass graves of Srebrenica victims. We were about something like 600 numbers already pulled out. And all of them are civilians. Some of them are with ligature and with blindfolds. And they are not soldiers. And it's not the first grave this summer. And they are telling about 1,800 soldiers who were killed during the fight around Srebrenica. Or like now, when Bosniak Commission published a list of 8,106 names of missing Srebrenica men. A list of names absolutely documented, with full documentation, because there are about 500-600 more names of missing Srebrenica men. But there is no full documentation, so Commission didn't want to print it. Serbs immediately are making a lot of fuss, and they are printing their own list of 3,500 Serbs who were killed in Srebrenica. Emir, you should know where they are. And another thing, on Monday, day after tomorrow, it will be commemoration of Srebrenica tragedy, of genocide. And you know what is going to happen on 12th? On 12th, someplace 30 kilometers from Srebrenica, on a way where men from Srebrenica were walking, in village of Kravica, where those who were caught or picked up from Cheshire were kept on 12th of July and then killed in the evening of July 12th. It will be open a memorial, and this memorial will be not dedicated not to all of them who were killed in Kravica warehouse. No, this memorial will be dedicated to poor Serbs who were killed in Bratunac, Srebrenica area. So it is outrageous, and it's actually why I hardly can believe in reconciliation and truth. Maybe if I would maybe if I would do different job, maybe if I would not live in Bosnia constantly day after day for 10 years, maybe I would think differently and have more hope. But I am always there. I will be there tomorrow night. And it's difficult to believe.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I have a question for Emir Suljagic, and if anyone else in the panel would like to comment, really. I read your column recently in which you argued that the fact that representatives of Serbia will be present in Srebrenica is a good thing, because it's in a way an admission of guilt, which will then make them do certain things like arrest more criminals. So could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Well, I think that first of all, one needs to be familiar with the Serbian political context. It is a country where 33% of the voters would today or tomorrow vote for the Serb Radical Party, which, to those of you who are not familiar, provided the bulk of irregulars, quote unquote, provided the bulk of men that were trained and equipped by the Serbian state security and then sent into Croatia and then from Croatia to Bosnia. Those are the people who did the really bloody work in 1992. So if you take that into account, the very fact that Boris Tadic is coming to Baračari is important. The other thing is, I wrote that basically in order to say, hold on, if you think that you are coming here and to be here for a couple of hours and then go to Belgrade and do nothing, then you shouldn't come. This visit means that both Serbia proper and authorities in Serbia proper and the Bosnian Serb authorities have to take very specific steps, and we're going to hold them to it. We're definitely going to hold them to it, and I think that victims, wherever they are, should actually try and do their bit to hold these people to that fact. And I think it's. My first reaction too was, oh God, no, I don't want these people here, because, this is going to be another insult to the victims, and these people have been insulted, and God knows they have been insulted for many times before. But then I thought that if we refused anybody hospitality, and if we refused anybody a chance to come there, it would be, in a way, it would be as if okay, for many people cannot get over their pain, but I think that there is a point. I'm presently, I'm sorry if I'm long-winded, but it might take me a while. I'm reading, and I was reading on the plane yesterday, Hannah Arendt's Banality of Evil, and there's a passage in there in which she describes Germany before 1968. The 50s and 60s before 1968, and if you read that, you'll see that I saw Bosnia in reality. I saw former mass murderers being distinguished lawyers. I saw former police officers running protection agencies. So basically, this is a very political and a very dirty process, and if you want to get to the bottom of it, then this is the way to fight it, and that was what I wanted to say. We're not going to get anybody to do anything if we tell people, no, you cannot come to Srebrenica, no, we cannot guarantee your security there, blah 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 blah. This is something that we have to do, and I understand not many people have the strength to do it. Another thing is that if you know the context of Eastern Bosnia, you'll know that man was the breadwinner of the family. Man was the center of the family. Now that with men out, most of those women are for the first time actually dealing with any sort of reality. Their reality before 1992 and then before 1995 was that they waited home and then they deal with their husband, and that their husband was in a way, they're linked with what was going on in the outside world. It's different now, and quite a lot of them are prone to react emotionally. Nobody can blame them. They're frustrated. Naturally, they're frustrated. But we need to become involved in this process. We need to make Serbia come forward with its part of Srebrenica, and of course with its part of Bosnia. But that's a different thing. But with this tape out now, this is a unique opportunity, and this tape means that with Boris Tadic there, we're going to be able to tell him, listen, we want to know not only the names of the people on that tape, we want to know who sent them to Bosnia. We want to know, and if you know that's the reason I said it. I'm sorry. I'm probably very incoherent, but
not incoherent at all. Ed.
I just wanted to pick up on some of the things Kamal was saying and underpin what you were saying, Eva, and indeed Vuillamy just then. I mean, we're using this term reconciliation, and we've used the term reckoning. They're not the same thing. What Emir is talking about, I think, is the beginning of a long, long process, which is, if it's only just starting to get underway with the visit that you mentioned, sir, on Monday, I don't see it happening. I think, we can't have peace without reconciliation. But I don't think you can have reconciliation until you have truth and the establishment of truth of what happened. That truth is not being established. One of the uniquenesses of the Srebrenica massacre is it is the only atrocity, so far as I'm aware, that the Republika Srpska has actually officially acknowledged. It did so only after having its arm twisted and twisted again and again. Eva referred to, I think, the first or second attempt on order of the High Commissioner to come up with, and they talked, I think, about mass suicides and French mercenaries being brought in to kill Muslims to discredit the Serbs. I mean, it was just disgraceful. They finally, last year, admitted to Srebrenica. But despite that admission, if you hang out from early evening through till closing time in the bar Venera in the heart of Srebrenica, which is not one of my favourite places to have a drink, but it happens to be the only one open, the massacre did not happen, it's a lie, it's all a fake. If you go and see the man who runs the War Veterans Association for the Bosnian Serb Army in Srebrenica, which is a polite way of describing his role, a man called Milan Milovanovic, he will tell you that the massacre was a lie, that Potocari is a fake, that they're bringing their bodies from all over Bosnia to bury there. I checked him out. He was on the staff of the Bratunac Brigade in July 1995. He signed for his salary that month. I mean, this is the extent of the denial still, despite the official recognition. When I went back to Umarska in the winter of 1996, the whole place under a coat of ice and lies, there were the guards at the door. And they said there was no camp here. It was a mine. I know. I was working here. I believed that he was working there, but I didn't believe that it was a mine. It's a question of trying to breach this wall of denial. But it's not only denial. You get into this weird balancing act of justification and denial. We did it because we had to, because there was a jihad going on, but we didn't do it, it's all a lie. But we did it because we had to, but we didn't do it, it's a lie. And you wonder, are these people crazy or are they just pretending to be crazy? I don't know where that process begins. Maybe it begins with the video. Maybe it begins in Belgrade. Maybe it begins with the young people in Prijedor who are challenging their parents. I don't know. But it is deep, 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 this denial. It is terrifying. And without it, I don't see that the returnees are safe. Without it, I don't see that we can hope for the united country of Bosnia that the army fought for.
No, I actually just wanted to sort of say it begins with arrests. It begins with, and I think that the start of any reconciliation process is judicial action, and it begins with police. It begins with Serbian police or Bosnian Serb police going to Bratunac and arresting its own members and then taking them to the state court in Sarajevo where they will be prosecuted. That's how it begins. And how it ends and when it ends is a different matter, and I don't think anybody at this point in time can actually talk about it.
Let's take a group of questions now, then we can bounce it around a bit. You had no.
I have a question for Maria. What possibility? Can you hear me? Okay. What possibility is there for justice for the women of Bosnia? Because this is a war where the most enormous number of women suffered organised mass rape. And I don't very often hear this referred to, although that is understandable it's something that troubles me very much, particularly when I'm listening also to discussion of reconciliation and also denial. It's very relevant to those concepts. I'm really reminded of a situation of domestic violence where the raped woman is told by the wider family to keep quiet in order to keep the family together. Or the raped child feels she must keep quiet in order to keep the family together. It seems to me there is immense onus on these women to, I don't know, I mean, I've read many of the testimonials, so I know to an extent they're not keeping quiet, they are speaking out as best they can. But these women in the main did not die, they're still alive. And, you know, I know you don't reconcile with your rapist, you just don't. And so what does it mean in that situation, and what does justice mean as well? What form might that take? And I'm just thinking about the denial actually, and I'm thinking, well, when there are a handful, or quite a big handful, of children who were born of that rape, and some of them know that that's what they were born of, and you know, a living human can't be denied, and that maybe that's one of the other beginnings. I'm going to just say one more thing, is that the official routes are of course hugely important and they are dominant. They do tend to be quite masculine. I'm wondering if there is any process of communication going on perhaps between Serbian women and Bosnian women, because possibly this is actually a hugely important, I mean, and I don't know, it probably is, and probably has been for ages, but no, nothing, can you talk about it?
Well, before I'll take a couple more questions so we can, that question, for those of you at the back, was about the issue of rape, and how is that being dealt with? And particularly for the children of those rapes.
Well, particularly for the women survivors, not
the women
just
survivors,
not just the children.
I'd love to contribute just 2 points to the debate. These aren't very questions. I'm Jim's partner and we returned to Bosnia recently together. The one comment I suppose to make was that in these points about judicial procedure being part of in your mind, a way of overcoming Ed's wall of denial. My problem with that, and it's fed by the experience we recently had in Prijedor, is that if you have justice in a climate of denial, or in the absence of acknowledgement, in a sense you invite the individuals who get indicted and arrested, or even being hunted down by forces from ICTY, to be transformed into martyrs. You get a community or sectors within a community who have a nationalist predisposition to disseminate this idea of a community under siege, which can help overcome the rifts that do exist in Serb society, I believe, and form a genuine sense of being under siege, which also invites further nationalism. But I also just wanted to briefly mention about this rush to engage with reconciliation projects. It really worries me. I'm South African. It worries me because of my own background, but it worries me because given the denial, given the continuing employment of known war criminals in public offices, given voting patterns all over Bosnia, but especially in RS, the only reconciliation which is feasible is a reconciliation that draws on the lowest common denominator. And that reconciliation is effectively meaningless, and it leans it leaves the kernel of triumphalism and a distilled form of nationalism untouched in order to be transmitted to the next generations who have no memories of pre-war Yugoslavia and no means of allowing that Yugoslav or Yugo nostalgia to dilute particularly potent forms of nationalism.
Okay, just one more comment and then we'll go back to the panel.
Thank you so much. May I just make a few staccato points?
Very quick, yeah.
Of course, justice is a juridical process. It needs to engage the human emotions, like we've heard. You don't get reconciliation before you achieve peace. Peace is not simply an absence of war. In order to get reconciliation, we must have opportunities to vent stories. Stories must explore pain, and that pain must be palpable to all those who participate in it, if that's not too many P's. Finally, may I say, at the risk of offending Kamal, 60 years ago we said never again. I know you have a problem with this never again, but never again is not something we just say once 60 years ago. It is up to us here today, 10 years on, in London, post the bombings two days ago, to keep saying never again. And we mustn't forget this. And this happened in Europe, for God's sake, under the protection of the United Nations. This is why it's so important.
It did. Well, thank you for that. We'll come back to you just in a second. Since the issue was raised to Maria of rape, talk about that.
I should like to say that I'm not an expert on this particular issue, but there are two things. Emir raised a very pertinent and interesting point that prior to the war for women, they all, especially rural women from the areas like Srebrenica, Bosnia, Vojnik, they didn't have very much, a sense of it as a very patriarchal society, etc., etc. However, I think that a lot of women have become strangely empowered by this and have made groups and have got their own campaigns and have a voice. However, how much strength and how much political impetus this voice ultimately has is debatable, because as a group of rural women in a camp, do they have any political importance is one debate, and 10 years down the line it's looking less likely that this is the case. However, I think that from their circumstances women have become strengthened by it, and the camps themselves are not very difficult places to live. There's a huge instance of domestic violence, children grow up in families of one-parent families. There are a whole raft of issues that are arising for as you said, whole cadre of children who are growing up in these circumstances. But in terms of cross the entity line reconciliation programs, I'm not aware of any. However, there may well be some. But I think that it's important to say that for some women, speaking their stories, telling their stories, it has become empowering in the sense that they've made themselves heard. They've become a sort of vocal group, and they can campaign for their own justice and rights. However, that's not to say that's the same for everybody, it does depend, but I think you're right, it's very much an individual and personal story, and of course the issue of children born from the rapes is one that's very pertinent, and not one that I think there is a huge amount of work done on, so it's certainly something that probably needs to be addressed.
We've had a lot of talk and questions about reconciliation and what needs to be done. Emir and Ed have talked about that. There are two questions which I think are on some people's minds. Why no arrests of Mladic and Karadzic 10 years on? And what is going to be the future of the Federation and the Republika Srpska? Is there going to be a single country? Is it conceivable that Bosnia one day might join the European Union? Yeah, do you have thoughts on either of those?
Yeah, I'm still sort of hoping that time is running out a bit, but that we still have 36 hours left for Mladic to be turned over, and then the Tadic visit on Monday can turn into more of a success than it's likely to be now. I think time is running out clearly for Mladic. Well, I've been saying that for quite a while, but this time it must be true. Time is running out for Mladic. Things are turning in Serbia. That there are now government statements which begin to suggest that the support for him, the official support he's had for many, many years, is beginning to wane. So I do expect him to be handed over. Now for Karadzic, at the very least what one can say is that life has not been very comfortable for the past 10 years. Time is running out for that man as well. But one should not forget that despite these two very high-profile people, so many others have been delivered to The Hague. Also that a process is now being set up in Bosnia to prosecute war criminals, which will bring it closer to the local community, which will be part of a process of reconciliation. That, although it's easy to get very depressed about it all, there are all these little glimmers of hope. Lots of things are being done. Even this event here is part of a process which allows for communities to get a bit closer together. The role we play today is that you again talk about what happened, you keep a memory alive, you therefore allow for a process to continue. I think that those things are very important. People who are returning to Srebrenica, they are returning, some of them. It's dire, it's difficult, but some people are returning. There is a younger generation growing up, which has different ideas. So, although it's a bit banal to say, but time will heal. That in a couple of generations things should be a hell of a lot better than they are now.
Let's take some more contributions and then further thoughts from the panel. Madam. Yep.
Yeah, I agree that the international community has a lot to blame, and perhaps Britain in particular. Britain took a leading part in the war, in the creation of the safe areas policy, the limitation of the number of troops at Security Council level, which would go to protect the safe areas. When some members of the Security Council, this was in May 1993, some members of the Security Council disagreed. They wanted to lift the arms embargo, and when a motion was put forward, it was actually the British representative who led the opposition to lifting the arms embargo. This was something that was supported by the United States at the time.